Lesson 2. The Nature and Purpose of Disease. 2.1. What is disease? 2.2. Purposes of disease. 2.3. Toxemia is the universal cause of disease. 2.4. Natural hygiene or life science, care of the ailing. 2.5. The character of disease. Inasmuch as we are having only one lesson specifically on the subject of disease, I bid you to study hard and absorb it well, for nearly all your clientele will suffer disease in one form or another. In this lesson, we will ascertain what disease is, what brings it about, what purposes it serves, and why it ends at all, in view of the fact that it is supposed to be an occasion when malevolent microbial entities have gained a destructive foothold in our bodies. We will explore how a body in descendancy, as it is said to be in disease, and microbes in ascendancy reverse these tendencies. 2.1. What is disease? 1. Disease, as a word, means very simply not at ease. A person is uncomfortable or suffering difficulties in maintaining energies for the functions he wishes to discharge and in keeping operative those facilities he wishes to exercise. In physiological terminology, disease means deviation from normal. That means that the body has deviated from regular functions. In a state of disease, the body has rechanneled or redirected its energies so that it has less than usual energy for functions normally engaged in. 2. There are two distinct types of disease. The first type of disease serves a purpose, and the second type serves none. Discerning these two types in your clients will be no problem at all. These two types of disease are as follows. 1. The first type is constructive disease, often called acute disease. 2. The second type of disease is degenerative. This results from organic impairment in which organs, tissues, bones, or other faculties have undergone destruction, distortion, or irreversible impairment. Your service to your clients will largely depend on your ability to recognize whether a disease is constructive or degenerative. I repeat, this is not difficult. You will, regardless of these conditions of disease, still proceed by guiding your client into healthful practices. Healthful practices being the universal panacea. If diseases are remediable and reversible, as most of them are, it is constructive. When disease can no longer be reversed through body remedial processes, it is degenerative. For instance, an arthritic's bony deposits can usually be autolysized and restored to near normal. But when ankylosis has occurred due to destruction of bone and cartilage and subsequent fusing, healthful practices will restore health except for the ankylosis. It is rarely reversible. However, many diseases commonly regarded as degenerative can be corrected by the body, most cases of arthritis being among them. 2.2. Purposes of disease. 2.2.1. Disease is started by the body. 2.2.2. Disease is an eliminative process. Disease affects the whole body, not just a part. Disease serves an important body purpose. The body initiates remedial diseases to accomplish a goal. The goal serves the whole body, not just an organ, area, or part. For instance, We can know we have diseased kidneys, but in actuality, the whole body is diseased. The fact that the symptoms are noticeable only in the kidneys does not mean that the rest of the body is unaffected. It means that the kidneys are the focal point for the eliminative effort, the point at which toxic matters are put out of the body. Everything that affects any part of the body affects the whole organism. If we have a bad back, the whole body is affected. We are concerned about the welfare of our toes, fingers, ears, legs, eyes, arms. We defend our whole being because our whole body is a single unit. There are no isolated parts about which we are unconcerned, either at the conscious or unconscious level of intelligence. We defend it all at all levels because it is all of us. We don't have a disease here or a disease there. It's suffered all over. An inflamed appendix has been overloaded with toxic materials because the body is overloaded. Body intelligence puts the overload out through all channels of elimination. But despite this, the load is so great the appendix is burdened with more than it can handle. This condition is the same in all remedial diseases where a local organ seems to be the only thing affected. 2.2.1 Disease is started by the body. The body itself institutes the crisis known as disease. Life scientists call this process a house cleaning or healing crisis. Such a procedure by the body is instituted when bodily integrity is compromised or threatened by an accumulation of uneliminated toxic materials. The level of vitality and the extent of the overload determine the type of crisis. Given high vitality, as in an infant, a very low level of toxicity is tolerated. In infants, colds are frequent. Given low vitality, as in most older people in our society, colds are a rarity. Because so few older people maintain vital bodies, the toxic overload drags them down into chronic diseases, degenerative diseases, and unsuspected pathology that leads to unexpected death or a sudden onset of cancer. The body must be in a toxic state before it will institute a crisis. Neither bacteria nor anything else starts and sustains a crisis. Microorganisms are incapable of unified action. In fact, they cannot exist where there is no food, soil for them. The living cells are not soil for bacteria. Bacteria are helpless against living cells. An invasion by bacteria, such as we imagine in contagion, never takes place. The bacteria that proliferate in a crisis are with us all the time. We harbor uncounted billions of microorganisms in our intestinal tract, on our skin, in our mouth and nose, and other body cavities. Thus, the body is the only actor in the crisis of elimination or cleansing, called a disease. Bacteria and viruses cannot be blamed for disease. Blaming disease on viruses or bacteria is an easy cop-out. It's not good business to tell a client that they have caused their own miseries, so the medical profession has blamed suffering on everything but the individual's own failure in the game of living. 2.2.2 Disease is an eliminative process. The body creates a crisis in response to a body's need to free itself of toxic matters and repair damages. Consequently, the body withdraws energy from normal body activities and redirects them to the healing crisis. I could tell you that I am suffering a disease at the moment. I'm not at ease with my larynx, as you've noticed in my trying to clear my voice. I ate some cabbage for my evening meal. It was very sharp, as it had some mustard oil on it, without doubt. Typically, any irritant in the throat, esophagus, or windpipe will occasion the flow of mucus, which encompasses the irritant for the purpose of ejecting it from the body. In my case now, the body has started a mucus flow to clear the passage of what was regarded as toxic or an irritating substance. This is a minor disease or unease, but it is disease, and the body reacted to maintain its functional integrity. The body will reject anything that's irritating. For example, if dust is put into your nose, the body will secrete mucus to surround and eject the dust irritant. Or you may sneeze. In both cases, the body is acting defensively. Thus, all remedial disease is body defensive action. Bacteria do not invade organisms, for they're always within the organism. Even after we've lost our intestinal flora after fasting, bacteria are still there. Bacteria can, in many cases, do what bears and many other animals do: hibernate or become dormant. Pasteur was not the father of bacteriology, as many people think. Antoine Bichon was the father of this science. Bichon was a scientist in the true sense of the word. He took what he called microzyma from the chalk cliffs of France. He found that, upon furnishing water, warmth, and other nutrients, the microzyma proliferated. These microorganisms have been entombed for 10 million years in a state of dormancy. So bacteria have certain qualities for survival that most are not aware of. The celebrated Dr. Lewis Thomas, who heads the Sloan Kettering Cancer Institute, said, "Pity not the man who has caught bacteria. Pity the bacteria that was caught by the man." This is to say that humans furnish a very rough environment for bacteria. The body keeps them restricted within certain bounds. The body controls bacteria at all times. The body is master of its domain. Bacteria do not control the body, as medical people have led us to believe. Following are 2 paragraphs from a Bible on natural hygiene, Dr. Shelton's first major work, Human Life, Its Philosophy and Laws. For ages, the study of disease has progressed. One by one, the various systems and system complexes that are presented by the diseased human body have been studied with painstaking care in both living and dead bodies. The study of pathology has reached a degree of perfection unknown to most of the collateral sciences that form what is called the science of medicine. Knowledge of pathology increased by leaps and bounds after the invention of the microscope. Until today, pathology is one of the most important studies for the medical student. Physiology, anatomy, histology, and biology are all made subservient to pathology. The study of disease has fascinated the student for ages. Health has received scant attention. Strange as it may appear, health has been considered of so little importance as to be unworthy of investigation. No schools ever existed for teaching the condition of health. Medical schools existed to train the student in a knowledge of disease and cures. Even today, no school exists that has its purpose and teaching of the conditions and requirements of health. The conditions of a healthy life are but little understood by the various healing professions and still less by the general public. Health is not in the professional line of the physician. The medical world is preoccupied with treating diseases with drugs that are currently in fashion. Their seeking out of bacteria and viruses as culprits in disease reminds me of a little joke we heard back in the Second World War. It goes like this. During the Second World War, a German civilian worked in a concentration camp. One evening, he pushed a wheelbarrow to the exit gate for inspection by the guard. The wheelbarrow was loaded with rags. The guard, very conscientious about his job and the security of the camp and its assets, methodically went through the rags, but found nothing. So he waved the worker through the gate. The very next day, the worker came through with a wheelbarrow of newspapers. The guard repeated the previous careful examination. The following day came a wheelbarrow of leaves, again the same thorough inspection. The day following this, the worker came to the guard pushing a heavy load of dirt. The guard was not going to be fooled. He made the worker dump the dirt and spread it out, then laboriously reloaded it on the wheelbarrow. The next workday came another load of newspapers. The guard was very suspicious that the worker was sneaking something out. So, in addition to other procedures, he tapped the handles and other places for concealed material that the worker might be stealing, but nothing was found. This went on almost every workday for a year. On occasion, the guard systematically searched the wheelbarrow, but never found anything of value being removed from the camp. By and by, the war was over. A while later, the former guard met the former construction worker on the street. He went up to the worker and stopped him abruptly with this smiling demand. "Hans, you have to tell me something. I'm no dummy. You were stealing something from the camp. I could never find it. Now that it doesn't matter, why not let me in on it?" Hans replied, "You dumbcoff. You saw it with your own eyes. I was stealing wheelbarrows." Such blindness characterizes the medical profession. The purpose of disease is so evident that the medics can't see it. They are looking for something that doesn't exist, and they have no idea, after countless millions of man-hours of chasing microbes and similar dead ends, that viruses as living entities do not exist. So they have gone into the phenomenon of disease elaborately and have chronicled over 20,000 different diseases. They name them after the area that is most affected. Sometimes they have multiple names because of the number of organs or organ systems or tissues which are affected. 2.3. Toxemia is the universal cause of disease. 2.3.1. The 7 stages of disease. 2.3.1.1. Enervation. 2.3.1.2. Toxemia or toxicosis. 2.3.1.3. Irritation. 2.3.1.4. Inflammation. 2.3.1.5. Ulceration. 2.3.1.6. Induration. 2.3.1.7. Cancer. 2.3.2. Viruses and bacteria. Their role in disease. 2.3.3. Disease complicated by byproducts of symbiotic bacteria. Actually, there is only one disease, no matter how it manifests itself, and the disease, which we call constructive disease, is occasioned by the body itself and is known as a crisis of toxemia or healing. 2.3.1. The 7 stages of disease. There are several stages of disease. The underlying cause of disease in all stages is toxemia. Although toxemia may arise from many sources, it basically exists because of insufficient nerve energy to sufficiently eliminate exogenous poisons and body wastes. Toxemia is not broad enough a term to cover the whole poisoning process, for it means poison in the blood. Actually, toxicosis exists. Tissues, cells, and interstitial spaces are also toxic-laden. In short, the whole body is toxic. Diseases present many different aspects because they evolve with the progressing deterioration of the organism that suffers them. Disease has 7 distinct stages. These stages correspond to the distinct differences of each stage of evolution. 2.3.1.1 Innovation. The first stage is not even recognized by physicians as a disease. Life scientists call it enervation. Most people call it nervous exhaustion. Enervation is a state in which the body is neither not generating sufficient nerve energy for the tasks the body must perform, or the task the body must perform may be greater than the normal nerve energy supply can cope with. In any event, the body becomes impaired, and an impaired body generates less nerve energy if the conditions of overwork or undergeneration persist. Most people know when they are nervously exhausted. Enervation can be caused by depletion of nerve energy in any of hundreds of ways. Sleep regenerates nerve energy. Obviously, insufficient sleep will not supply us with our needs. It will not fully recharge our batteries. We need sleep to regenerate nerve energy for the brain and nervous system. Nerve energy is a form of electricity measurable in millivolts. Sleep laboratories have successfully substituted electricity in place of the body's own. When this is accomplished, it is called electrosleep. It takes only 2 hours out of 24 to fully restore nerve energy in this manner. Demonstrating that nerve energy is electrical is easy. If you mashed your finger, a message would immediately go to the brain, and back would come a command to remove the finger from that which applied the pressure. Moreover, the brain would command the entire balance of the body to cooperate in the extraction of the finger from the offending pressure. Only electricity is capable of such speedy transmission. No chemical process or circulatory process is capable of this dispatch. It occurs only through a network of nerves with conductive abilities, and electricity is the only form of energy it can conduct. If you take a weak voltage and hook it up while holding someone else's hand, the other person gets a shock immediately when you touch the live electrical source. I don't think anyone can doubt that we do generate electricity, and that is the form of energy we use to conduct our physical and mental activities. Sensations are transformed into electrical stimuli and forwarded to the brain. The brain interprets these and sends out commands based upon the interpretation. Thus, if you put your finger to a hot object, the finger is commanded in a flash to withdraw from it. The foregoing is to demonstrate that the body is primarily an organism that works on the amount of electricity it generates and which it has in its reserves. If this supply is depleted or otherwise insufficient to cope with the needs of the body, then body functions become impaired, including the processes of elimination of both endogenous metabolic wastes and exogenous poisons introduced into the body. This impairment begets further impairment, including diminishing the body's ability to restore depleted nerve energy. The body starts going downhill. The next stage of this decline is called toxemia. 2.3.1.2 Toxemia and toxicosis. When toxic substances from whatever source saturate the blood and tissues, the lymph system and interstitial fluids, then the condition of toxemia and toxicosis exist. As functioning organisms, we generate a tremendous amount of toxic byproducts. We generate enough carbon dioxide to kill us within a few minutes. If our lungs fail to function, carbon dioxide buildup and lack of oxygenation would overwhelm us quite quickly. We can accommodate only so much carbon dioxide, and this is but one of many waste products. There are trillions of cells in the human body. Tens of billions of these expire every day. They are replaced by new ones. The old cells are broken down by lysosomes, enzymes that reside in a little organelle within the cell itself. Upon cell death, these enzymes break the cell down into many smaller components for elimination. These components are cell debris. Some of these components, such as iron, protein, and amino acids, are recycled by the body. Some 95% of the body's iron needs and 70% of its protein needs are met by recycling. Certain other of the body's needs are met by recycling as well. This will give you some idea as to the immense provenance and wisdom of the body in meeting its needs. Other components of the decomposed cell are the RNA and DNA. These are toxic while in the system. If they accumulate, as they do in most humans in today's society, a condition of intoxication, toxemia, and toxicosis exists. These are what medical people call viruses, and they mistakenly attribute to this dead debris the powers of life and malevolence. Tissue and blood saturation with toxic materials can be caused by both internally generated wastes and pollutants taken in from the outside which the body has not been able to eject from the vital domain. Intoxication occurs when we overload the body with toxic materials from the outside, or we fail to observe our capacities and overwork, get insufficient sleep, or are subjected to great stress, or when any number of other factors deplete the body of nerve energy or prevent its sufficient regeneration. For instance, stresses, emotional shocks, or traumatic experiences can drain our bodies of nerve energy very quickly. It's just like shorting out a battery of a car. At some level of intoxication, we begin to experience the next stage of disease, which is called irritation. 2.3.1.3 Irritation. Irritation results from toxic materials being sensed by our nerve network. Most of us pay this stage little mind, and certainly physicians do not pay it heed. When we feel itchy, queasy, jumpy, uneasy, or when we have bothersome but not painful areas, irritation exists. Tickling of the nose is a form of irritation. Collections of mucus along the mucous membranes irritate. Although irritation is not painful, it is a gentle prod that moves us to seek comfort, to establish freedom from it. For instance, the urge to urinate or defecate is a form of irritation due to accumulation of wastes greater than the body feels comfortable with. However, the urge is not painful unless it is ignored until it creates too much pressure in its area. Near painful irritation forces us to deal with the problem. When a person drinks too much alcohol, we say that he or she is intoxicated. That's a good example of exogenous intoxication. While all alcohol intake is damaging to the organism, the body can speedily eliminate a small amount before much damage has occurred. increase the intake, and the elimination is proportionately less and the damage proportionately greater. The first drink of alcohol occasions only irritation, which we also call stimulation. But any toxic material, be it salt, caffeine, or condiments, will irritate or stimulate. This is a condition wherein the body sets in force its defensive mechanisms and accelerates its internal activities. This might well be linked to an alarm aboard ship where all hands are summoned. A frenzy of activity results in a bout with enemy forces. Unfortunately, this often makes us feel good or hyper or even euphoric. It is distressing to see a euphoric condition arise out of a situation that is damaging to the organism. If the cause of enervation, intoxication, irritation remain in force, and the body can't cope with it, the body initiates a responsive crisis called inflammation. 2.3.1.4 Inflammation. This is usually the stage in which physicians recognize pathology. It is the stage where sufferers are keenly aware of a problem, for it involves pain. As well, it involves bodily redirection of vital energies. The intestinal tract is closed down. Energy that would normally be available for activity there is preempted and redirected to the massive effort to cope with a severe condition of intoxication. Lest the integrity of the organism be dealt a mortal blow or crippled, the body musters its all to the emergency. In inflammation, the toxicants have usually been concentrated in an organ or area for a massive expulsion effort. The area becomes inflamed due to the constant irritation of the toxic materials. When inflammation exists, we are said to have an itis, appendicitis, tonsillitis, hepatitis, or nephritis, for example. Note that the itises just cited are all due to overburdening of 4 different organs of purification and elimination. The names of itises are usually after the organ or tissue area that is inflamed. Thus, if we have a cold, we have rhinitis. If we have inflammation of the sinus cavities, we have sinusitis. If we have inflammation of bronchial tissue, we have either bronchitis or asthma, and so it goes on. We have these peculiar pathologies because in each case the body elected to eliminate the extraordinarily toxic load through the organ affected. For instance, asthma exists because the body has selected the bronchi as its outlet for toxic materials. The condition is chronic because the toxic condition is unceasing. While the sufferer continues to intoxicate himself or herself, the body continues to eliminate the overload through the bronchi or alveolar tissue. Inflammation or fever is a body crisis response to a life-threatening situation. The body and the body alone creates the fever. It is an evidence or symptom of increased and intense body activities directed at cleansing and repair. The extraordinary energies employed for a fever are at the expense of energies normally involved in digestion, work or play, thinking and seeing, etc. Fever is a healing activity. The idea of suppressing it is equivalent to hitting a drowning man over the head so he'll cease his struggles. For instance, if rhinitis or influenza sufferers are drugged, it amounts to hitting the body's healer over the head. Thus, the eliminative effort is suppressed and the toxicity increases until other organs, usually the lungs, become saturated. not only with the toxicity, but the drugs administered as well. When body vitality reasserts itself, a condition known as pneumonia is likely to result. Inflammation is the fourth stage of disease and is the body's most intense effort to cleanse and restore itself. The next stage of disease is destructive or degenerative. It will result if the causes of general body intoxication are continued. 2.3.1.5 Ulceration. Ulceration means that a staggering amount of cells and tissue structures are being destroyed. Physiological systems are wiped out due to the body's inability to live in an unceasing toxic media. Where tissue is destroyed, there remains a void. An example is a canker sore of the mouth. Lesions or ulcers can occur in other areas of the body also. These conditions are often intensely painful, for these are exposed nerves. While the body may use an ulcer as an outlet for extraordinary toxic buildup, thereby relieving itself, it will heal the ulcer if causes are discontinued, or if the toxicity level is significantly lowered. This process of repairing the damage is like patching up pants with holes in them. This patching up process is called induration. 2.3.1.6 Induration. Induration is a hardening of tissue, or the filling in of tissue vacancy with hard tissue. Scarring is a form of induration. But in this stage of disease, there is direction and purpose in hardening. The space is filled, and the toxic materials that threaten body integrity are encapsulated in a sack of hardened tissue. The ulcer and the toxic materials are sealed off by the hardening of the tissue around them. This is a way of quarantining the toxic materials, often called tumor formation. It is this condition that is diagnosed as cancer 19 times out of 20, when in fact no cancer exists. Induration is the last stage during which the body exerts intelligent control. Should the pathogenic practices which brought matters to this stage be continued, cells and tissue systems go wild. They survive as best they can on their own. Cells become parasitic, living off the nutrients they can obtain from the lymph fluid, but contributing nothing to the body economy. They have become disorganized. Their genetic encoding has been altered by the poisons. Thus, they are not capable of intelligent, normal, organized action within the context of a vital economy. When cells go wild in this manner, the condition is called cancer. 2.3.1.7 Cancer. The end point of the evolution of disease is cancer. It is the last stage of disease and is usually fatal, especially if the causes that brought it about are continued. Cessation of causes and indulgence of healthful practices may arrest it, for they can so revitalize the body that they may even destroy the cancer cells. It's all relative. Cancer cells live in a hostile environment, but still divide and flourish as long as nutrients are available to them. Cancer cells may be regarded as cells that have become independent and have reverted to the status of uncontrolled primitive cells, cells that live entirely on their own, as do protozoa. These stages of disease are quite distinct in their characters, yet the lines are more or less arbitrarily drawn. This often happens in attempts to categorization, where one form evolves into another. The dividing lines have no clear-cut delineation. People sometimes ask when cancer begins. Hygienists or life scientists say that it begins with the first cold or rash of childhood. The first crisis a baby endures begins the pathological chain that leads to cancer. This evolutionary chain begins, then, because the phenomenon of life is one constant violation of the laws of life, from beginning to end. 2.3.2 Viruses and Bacteria, Their Role in Disease. After viewing the 7 stages of disease, it should be obvious that bacteria and so-called viruses do not cause disease. Viruses do cause disease if you call toxic waste material of decomposed body cells viruses. Decomposed cell debris is precisely what virologists and physicians are calling viruses. They regard viruses as living entities when, in fact, medics have not in all history observed any quality of life they ascribe to viruses. What is called virus is always dead. It's never been observed to be alive. It doesn't have the first prerequisites of life, that is, metabolic and control mechanisms. Even bacteria have that. I repeat, what is called viruses are nothing more than components of decomposed cells. Some people insist that syphilis is caused by bacteria, more specifically, spirochetes. Though the term spirochetes has given way to viruses called herpes these days, that's today's fashion. It was easy to demonstrate that spirochetes were never responsible in the first place. When you ask a bacteriologist which comes first, the soil or the bacteria, he will answer that the soil must exist first for bacteria to thrive. For bacteria are presented a deadly environment by living cells. So bacteria never exist in a proliferating state where there is no food or soil for their propagation. They multiply when there is a feast, and they die off when there is famine or adverse environment. Hence, bacteria no more create their food supply than flies cause garbage. The garbage must pre-exist the flies, and on the same order, the garbage or soil on which bacteria thrive in our bodies must pre-exist their presence and propagation. In other words, they do not cause the condition. They are there because of the condition. When the body has a highly toxic condition such as inflammation, it will absorb bacteria from the intestinal cavity and transport them to the point where deadly materials have been concentrated. The bacteria then symbiotically assist in breaking up these toxic materials for elimination. Of course, the excreta of bacteria are toxic too. Ignorant physicians regard these bacteria not as our symbiotic partners in the process of combating disease, but as the cause of the disease. Koch destroyed Pasteur's original theories by his 4 postulates. The first 2 state that if a disease is caused by a certain type of bacterium, then that form of bacteria must always be present when the disease exists. The other says that the disease must always be occasioned by the presence or introduction of the bacteria said to be responsible. Although these cardinal principles are self-evident, so many exceptions exist as to disprove totally the germ theory of disease causation. Koch laid down his postulates in 1892. The medical profession never has given them credence. To this day, the profession clings to the disproven germ theory, except that germs in the form of bacteria are taking a back seat to an even more elusive entity called a virus. Bacteria exists in a multitude of strains, forms, and metabolic capabilities. Bacteria are versatile and in many cases change forms and lifestyles in keeping with their character of the soil available to them. Round bacteria can become rod-shaped and vice versa. It used to be said that pneumococcus caused pneumonia, but it was noted that this type of bacteria was absent in nearly half the cases. Moreover, administering the bacteria to healthy organisms never occasioned pneumonia. The plain fact that bacteria are in the human body, as they are everywhere else, is not recognized by the medical profession. Bacteria are symbiotic partners of all creatures in nature. In order to come to exist in nature in the first place, humans had to establish a state of symbiosis with all natural forces. In the second place, if bacteria invaded organisms and laid them low as they're supposed to do, if the body could be laid low while in a state of health, then the impetus or momentum the bacteria had built up would become more pronounced and overwhelming as the organism receded in disease. It would be a one-way trip, the same as vultures picking the bones of a cadaver. If bacteria and viruses cause disease, once they have overwhelmed the body and actually debilitated it, how does the much weakened body regain ascendancy? If you were to inquire into this deeply and pursue it to its logical conclusion, you'd find that once a body has lost the battle while in a state of health, it's going to lose the war after being disabled. 2.3.3 Disease complicated by byproducts of symbiotic bacteria. At their strongest, bacteria complicate disease because the byproducts of bacterial fermentation or putrefaction are deadly poison. In fermentation, the byproducts are lactic acid, acetic acid, or vinegar and alcohol. Putrefaction involves nitrogenous foods or proteins. The byproducts of rotting protein are ammonias, indoles, scatols, purines, etc. They are toxic within organisms. Although the body can normally eliminate these poisons, in fact, our feces and urine are loaded with the byproducts of protein decomposition, both from our body decomposition and bacterial decomposition. You've heard of the ideal of living in a germ-free environment. This is an impossibility, of course. Trillions of bacteria are in and on our bodies at all times. If we were free of these minute organisms, we'd soon die. They perform many essential services for us, which will be discussed in a later lesson. Suffice it to say that we live symbiotically with bacteria. Bacteria are wrongfully blamed for our own indiscretions. It's the rare medic who doesn't find a scapegoat for his clients and remove responsibility for problems from the shoulders of the sufferer. Medical logic is not very logical. According to medical thinking, bacteria or viruses invade our bodies and destroy our cells. It would seem that our body defenses permit this by their intimations. It would seem that once these invading entities have a head start, they would not stop destroying the rest of the cells of the organism, especially as the first strike has crippled the organism and lessened its ability to defend itself. By medical logic, the bacteria are there in greater numbers, for they proliferate astronomically when they found a feast situation. How can the body reverse this situation and recover? The medics believe that they administer drugs that kill off the bacteria so that the body can have a chance to recover. Also, they have people believing that medicines are healing agents or that they assist in healing. When you start asking deep, penetrating questions into the cause of disease, the medical theories fall of their own weight. They cannot be sustained in the face of self-evident truths. So we have to find the rational basis for disease causation. Disease has a sole unitary cause. It is instituted and conducted by the body itself. It is the only organized entity capable of coordinating the various processes of disease. Disease is occasioned when toxic materials that we have generated within or taken in from without are uneliminated due to the body's inability to cope with them. These debilitate and devitalize the organism until, at a point where it can no longer tolerate the growing toxic load at its mean level of vitality, the body institutes a crisis, redirecting its body energies to the enemy within. Let's go back to pneumonia. Physicians worry that when a person has a cold or the flu, it will become pneumonia. It occurs so many times among the patients that they make heroic efforts to prevent this. They administer drugs galore. Yet, pneumonia occurs so frequently, despite the drugging, that doctors feel powerless in the face of pneumonia, one of the primary causes of death in our society. The question arises, what causes pneumonia then? Does pneumococcus survive the drug onslaught and cause pneumonia anyway? If colds are, as we teach, a cleansing process, how does a body that is in crisis get yet worse? If the body is eliminating toxic materials profusely through the respiratory tract, as in colds and flu, then how do the lungs also become contaminated? All cases of colds and flu recover very quickly if the sufferer goes to bed in an airy room with lots of natural daylight. Almost total rest is called for. Total abstention from food, but plenty of pure water is needed. Under these conditions, debility ceases in from 1 to 3 days. But if the sufferer refuses to rest and continues to eat the same bad food that contributed heavily to the crisis in the first place, the eliminative effort may be less than the continued toxic buildup, in which case pneumonia may be a concomitant. But if the sufferer goes to a medic and gets drugged in addition, the body turns its attention to eliminating the drugs. It may cease the cold or flu altogether in face of the greater enemy. The continued toxic buildup spreads to the lungs. The drugs and toxic materials may concentrate so strongly in the lungs as to cause death or to set the stage for cancer. Many autopsies reveal people who have had pneumonia or who have smoked or lived in highly polluted air have tumors, indurated sacs of lung tissue which encapsulate toxic substances in the lungs. Many cases of long fasts have been conducted in which pneumonia has been suffered many years before. The drugs that had been given had been noted to make their exit from the lungs during the course of the fast as the body autolyzed the tumors and expelled their contents. Yet, despite these obvious cases of pneumonia, medical professionals are still saying that pneumococcus causes pneumonia when, in fact, more than 25% of pneumonia cases never have pneumococcus. Now that medics are getting more and more away from the germ theory of disease causation, they're invoking viruses as the culprits. This is true only if by viruses we mean uneliminated metabolic wastes. But when you start probing into what viruses are and how they cause disease, you might call this the evil spirit theory of disease. For the medics imbue viruses with the qualities of malevolent spirits. Such blindness characterizes the medical profession. The purposes of disease is so evident that medics can't see it. Just as within the guard in the concentration camp, they are looking for something that doesn't exist, and they overlook that which they see plainly all the time. Medical research has chronicled over 20,000 different diseases. They name almost every variation. They have multiple names because of the number of organs or tissues that exhibit symptoms. All of this is only one disease, and the disease, which we call constructive disease, is occasioned by the body itself and is known as toxemia or toxicosis. 2.4. Natural hygiene or life science, care of the ailing. 2.4.1. The work of Doctors Tilden, Carrington, and Shelton. 2.4.2. The hygienic definition of disease. 2.4.1. The work of Doctors Tilden, Carrington, and Sheldon. Just as there is one universal cause of disease, there is one universal panacea. In mythology, Asclepius has two daughters. Both were goddesses. One was the goddess of health, and she was called Hygiena, and the other was Panacea. She was the goddess of healing. The name itself, in Greek, means all healing or universal healing. While these goddesses are mythological, they do represent valid concepts. Panacea can be achieved by a return to natural practices. Fasting is the quickest way to invoke the universal panacea. Just as the universal disease is a toxic-laden body, the universal panacea is establishing the most ideal conditions under which the body can cleanse itself of the toxicity and repair the damages suffered. Fasting is the answer. It works in all cases of constructive disease, that is, disease where organic damage of an irredeemable nature has not occurred. Some great luminaries have long since rediscovered the Grecian panacea. Dr. Jennings first employed it until Dr. John Tilden elaborated on it in his scholarly book, Toxemia Explained. Dr. Herwood Carrington wrote a few very illuminating volumes about natural hygiene, but Dr. Shelton probed deeper and farther afield than did all those before him. He built upon the shoulders of all who went before him and added a touch of his own genius. In our text section, some observations of Dr. Carrington are presented. Here is a quote from Dr. Herbert M. Shelton about the nature of disease. 2.4.2. The hygienic definition of disease. The hygienic system teaches that disease is a remedial effort, a struggle of the vital powers to purify the system and recover the normal state. This effort should be aided, directed, and regulated if need be, but never suppressed. What is the mysterious thing called disease? It is simply an effort to remove obstructing material, which we call toxic materials, from the organic domain and to repair damages. Disease is a process of purification and repair. It is remedial action. It is a power struggle to overcome obstruction and to keep the channels of circulation free. Actually, disease is really more than this if we view it in all aspects. Dr. Carrington has simplified Dr. Shelton's presentation somewhat. He says the following: disease is an attempt of the body to free its cells and circulatory systems of clogging and toxic materials. It is a desperate body rallying its remaining resources to the task of purgation and restoration. We have many illustrious forebears in the elaboration and creation of what we call natural hygiene or life science. Most notable among our forebears have been some truly great women. While women were spurned in the medical profession, the hygienic movement has truly an enlightened and unfettered one. It welcomed women with open arms, and if we leave the renegade MDs aside, their numbers also equal those of male hygienic professionals. How many of you have heard of Louisa May Alcott? Yes, all of you have. But how many of you know that she was a hygienist? That her father was a hygienist? That her brother, William Alcott, was a professional hygienist and was also a brilliant writer? I'm sure you've all heard of Florence Nightingale, who gave new dignity and direction to the profession of nursing. She was a hygienist. How many of you have heard of Ellen White? She was a hygienist who founded the religion we know today as the Seventh-day Adventists. There are many unsung heroines among women who were hygienic professionals. Mary Gove, Susan Nichols, Linda Burfield Hazard, and others were a credit to both the profession of hygiene and to womanhood. Perhaps the most famous hygienist of the fair sex was Florence Nightingale. Her daring on the battlefields of Eastern Europe still draws our admiration for the courage of her convictions. The British were fighting the Russians, and more soldiers were dying behind the battle lines than on them. The physicians and their treatments were killing off the wounded and ailing faster than the Russians. When Florence Nightingale arrived on the battle scene, she really took charge, despite the physicians. What she did was a very simple thing. She went to the rooms of the wounded and ailing and opened the windows for fresh air. She would not permit drugs. She gave the patients water, which was against medical policy at the time. She rejected heavy feeding and, in fact, for many, any feeding at all. Being confined to a battlefield hospital had been a death sentence before. Now almost all the wounded and sick became well speedily. It's all history, and Florence Nightingale became famous because of her tremendous success employing the mere rudiments of hygienic methods. This is all the more phenomenal when you consider that Miss Nightingale lived in a medical age and in a man's world. She defied the medics and won. She was truly a pioneer hygienist. The world, despite its poverty on the health scene, is still richer for her having been amongst our forebears. 2.5. The character of disease. 2.5.1. Diseases are not contagious. 2.5.2. How plagues and epidemics develop. 2.5.3. Drugs are dangerous to both bacteria and human cells. In order to understand disease, we must understand health. Health is the enjoyment of full faculties and functioning power. Disease is not the opposite of health, but an expression of healthy vitality while under the burden of toxicosis. Disease is a body-instituted and conducted crisis for the purpose of purifying and repairing itself. Disease is caused by indulging in practices or being subjected to materials and influences not normal to the human organism, that to which we are not adapted will cause disease. It is a misconception that we have to fight disease. It will not occur unless it is caused. A huge catalogue of materials and influences which are abnormal to the body could be given, but it's not that complicated. We only need to maintain the simple needs of life which build and sustain health. We should consume only pure water at thirst demands, and wholesome raw ripe fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds as genuine hunger dictates. We are frugivores, and it is to a diet of fruits as nature delivers them that we are biologically adapted. Further, we are adapted to pure air, sunshine, rest and sleep, pleasant environment, emotionally balanced companions. In short, we are adapted to a harmonious world. We are so constituted that health results when our physical, mental, emotional, intellectual, and aesthetic needs are met. Thus, diseases other than degenerative ones may be said to be body crises for the purpose of restoring health. The cause, purpose, and nature of disease have now been delineated. Certain questions will be explained below. 2.5.1 Diseases are not contagious. Student, is it true that diseases are not contagious in any sense? Instructor, that is correct. Diseases are not contagious in any sense simply because they are body instituted. We cannot transfer our toxic load to someone else. That should be self-evident. A hygienist can go into a sick room and not suffer a bit for it. Obviously, most physicians and nurses and other people go to the sick rooms, even those housing the most so-called contagious diseases. They never contract the disease or suffer, even though on occasion medics claim they do. You cannot transfer your toxic materials to another person unless you have it drawn out of you and injected into the person. The medics do, indeed, do that in transfusions, but the contagion here is medically induced rather than occurring within the realm of natural possibilities. It is said that colds, flu, leprosy, and a number of other things are contagious. As we learn more, diseases become less and less contagious. Asthma, cancer, psoriasis, meningitis, poliomyelitis, and a long list of other diseases have come off the contagious list. Measles, chickenpox, and other afflictions are still on the list of diseases said to be contagious. The only thing contagious about these diseases is medical ignorance. That is the most contagious of all. 2.5.2 How plagues and epidemics develop. The reason that there seems to be epidemics is that the true contagion is an epidemic of similar bad habits. We all eat pretty much the same junk, are subjected to the same seasons, the same type of housing, and, in many other ways, indulge the same health-sapping practices. It's no wonder that many of us suffer the same diseases. Like causes beget like effects. Of course, this is modified in the human situation by the diathesis of each individual. Thus we see that, within the context of a given family or group, people have more or less the same bad habits and suffer the same diseases. This business about incubation periods of germs and viruses is strictly medical mythology. We'll get into the depths of that and study it methodically in later lessons. To what are plagues and epidemics attributed? Today's epidemics are for the most part invented and publicized in America by the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia. It is a federal service that does yeoman service for the medical profession. When the drug companies want to sell lots of flu vaccine, measles vaccine, etc., they get the CDC to release the scare propaganda that stampedes the public into the physicians' offices for shots. To entertain the thought that vaccines injected into people makes them immune is an absurdity not worthy of serious consideration. It is a species of voodooism. Epidemics today result, I reassure you, from mass indulgence of the same bad habits and subjection to the same pathogenic living conditions. It's no accident that almost 90% of the affections labeled generally as colds and influenza occur within a 7-month period of the year. The reasons epidemics occur in winter and not in summer should be obvious. If anything, microbial life is more active in summer, just as we are, and their functions are depressed in winter. But lo and behold, microbial forms of life are said to be more active and to cause epidemics. That's nonsense, of course. In winter, we eat less wholesome food. We eat more junk. We do not exercise as much. We stay indoors and breathe foul air. In the summer, we get more sunshine, more exercise, more fresh air, fresh, ripe fruits. In short, we live more healthily in summer and less healthfully in winter. Conditions cause us to live as to generate our diseases. General conditions are general ill health. It is not contagion of germs, but contagion of pathogenic conditions that create what are termed plagues or epidemics. 2.5.3 Drugs are dangerous to both bacteria and human cells. Hygienists or life scientists deplore the medical practice of feeding and ailing and drugging them too. When ill, the continuance of feeding alone is enough to thwart the healing forces within, but the addition of drugs so destroys vital powers that the body must often redirect its purification efforts to freeing itself from the more virulent poisons administered. Thus it is seen that medical professionals are death-dealing rather than being life-enhancing. Yes, drugs kill bacteria, but they're just as deadly to all forms of metabolic life. That which deranges and destroys the metabolic functions of bacteria usually does likewise to the cells of all forms of life. Even physicians will tell you that drugs have no effect on viruses. Of course they don't have any effect on what they call viruses, because that is dead cell debris that can't be made any deader. In conclusion, I assure you that disease is not something to fear. That's like being scared of your own body. If you fear anything, fear your disposition to indulge in unwholesome foods and unwholesome living conditions.